They say every girl dreams of Hollywood, but I never imagined mine would turn into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I remember the exact moment I realized this wasn't about art or passion or even talent. It was about power, twisted, suffocating power, and I was on the wrong end of it. The first time he touched me, it wasn't in private. It was on set, in front of 10 people, and no one said a damn thing. They just looked away. Some even laughed, and I smiled, like it was okay. Like I didn't feel like my soul was being peeled from my body. Hi, I'm Harper, and before I go on, I need you to know I wasn't always like this. I used to believe in things, in dreams, in art, in myself. I used to think if I worked hard enough, I'd get there, that I'd make it, that I could be someone. Welcome to Confession Reddit, the channel where we share real stories, some dark, some shocking, but all brutally honest. If you've ever been pushed too far, silenced for speaking up, or made to feel small by someone who held your future in their hands, then this story is for you. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you believe the truth should never stay hidden. Now, let me take you back to where it all started. I was 26 when I landed the job. It wasn't glamorous. I wasn't an actress. I wasn't even holding a camera. I was a glorified assistant on a mid-budget thriller being shot in New Mexico. My official title was production coordinator, but that basically meant I did everything no one else wanted to do. I fetched coffee, I scheduled meetings, I tracked down missing props, and fielded tantrums from talent who thought they were God's gift to cinema. But I was grateful, because for someone like me, a girl with a mountain of student debt and no safety net, this was the closest I'd ever come to the industry I loved. The director's name was Blake Kessler. He was a big deal. Not Spielberg big, but big enough. He had 2 Sundance Awards under his belt and a reputation for pushing boundaries. People respected him. They whispered about his brilliance, his temper, and his taste for younger women. But no one warned me. Or maybe they did in their own way. They just smiled that tired smile and told me to be careful. The first week was fine. Grueling hours, sleepless nights, endless pressure, but nothing I couldn't handle. I even started to feel proud of myself. Then came the night shoot. It was close to midnight, we were behind schedule, and Blake was pacing like a madman. He yelled at the lighting team, cursed out the lead actor, and then turned to me with this hollow grin. "Harper, can you come to the trailer with me? We need to discuss scene continuity." I followed. Of course I followed. That was my job. The trailer door shut behind me, the lights were low. He poured himself a drink, then offered me one. I declined. He asked me to sit. I obeyed, and then he leaned in, too close, his hand on my knee, his breath thick with whiskey. He said, "You've got something special. I can see it. You want this, don't you? This life, this world?" I froze. I remember every sound in that moment. The clink of ice in his glass, the distant hum of the generators outside, the pounding of my heart like a drum line in my ears. When he kissed me, I didn't kiss back, but I didn't push him away either, not physically. My body just stopped. He pulled back and studied me. He said, "You're smart. You know how this works." I left the trailer shaking. I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at myself in the mirror for 10 full minutes. Then I wiped my face, pulled myself together, and went back to set like nothing happened. Because what was I going to do? Report him? To who? The producers were his friends. HR was a joke. If I caused trouble, I'd be blacklisted before the morning call sheet came out. And I needed the money. Rent was due, my mom had medical bills. I had already maxed out 2 credit cards just getting to New Mexico. So I convinced myself it was just a moment, just a slip, that it wouldn't happen again. But it did. Over and over. Sometimes it was a hand on my lower back that lingered too long. Sometimes it was comments disguised as jokes about how tight my jeans were or how lucky my boyfriend must be. I laughed them off. I had to. Until the night he followed me into the wardrobe trailer. That time it wasn't just words or suggestive glances. He cornered me, pressed his body against mine, whispered things I won't repeat. I said no out loud more than once, but he didn't care. I got out, barely, and still I came back the next day. People don't understand that part. They ask, "Why didn't you quit? Why didn't you scream? Why did you let it happen?" Because I couldn't afford not to. Because I'd worked so hard to get here. Because when you grow up poor and hungry and invisible, the dream of making it isn't just a dream, it's survival. But each time he touched me, something inside me cracked.
I started sleeping less, eating less. I'd flinch when people got too close. I lost weight, lost color. I wore baggier clothes, avoided mirrors, stopped answering calls from home. People noticed. One of the makeup girls, Jenna, pulled me aside one afternoon. "Are you okay? You don't seem like yourself." I wanted to tell her. God, I wanted to. But what if she told someone? What if it got back to him? So I smiled. I always smiled. By the third month of production, I wasn't me anymore. I was a hollow shell with a headset. I existed only to keep the machine running. But the worst part, he started getting bolder. Like he knew I wouldn't fight back. Like he enjoyed watching me crumble in silence. And I hated myself for letting him. That's the thing they don't tell you about this kind of violation. It doesn't just steal your body. It steals your voice, your dignity, your identity. And I still had 5 weeks left on the contract.
I started counting the days, not because I was excited for the wrap party or proud of what we'd made, but because every passing day meant one step closer to getting away from him, from this place, from the version of myself that I barely recognized anymore. Blake had stopped pretending to be subtle. He began texting me late at night, saying things like, "Great work today," or "Let's meet to discuss adjustments." But we both knew what he meant. The night I didn't respond, he had me reassigned to back-to-back night shoots, exhausting shifts that stretched till dawn and left me hollow. He was testing me, seeing how much I would endure, how much I would sacrifice for a paycheck. And every time I showed up without protest, I confirmed it for him. I was trapped, and he was in control. Sometimes I'd sit in my car after work, gripping the steering wheel so tight my fingers would cramp, blasting the AC to numb my skin. I'd stare at my reflection in the rearview mirror and ask myself if I was still a person or just an object with a name tag. One night I tried to call my sister, not to tell her the truth, just to hear someone who remembered who I used to be. But she didn't pick up. She was probably asleep or working her late shift at the diner, and I didn't blame her. I hadn't been around much lately anyway. Hadn't answered her texts, hadn't sent money home like I promised. I was too busy surviving, too ashamed of what I was becoming. I stopped wearing makeup, I stopped eating lunch, I stopped laughing. The only sound I made most days is my fake little customer service voice, the one I used when people barked orders at me or when I had to confirm deliveries and shoot times. The one that sounded cheerful and agreeable even though inside I was screaming. I couldn't tell anyone, not Jenna from makeup who had her own demons, not Marcus from the grip team who barely spoke, not even the assistant director, Diane, who I'd once thought was strong but who looked the other way every single time Blake brushed up against me or made another comment about my ambition. I began to understand something ugly. This wasn't just Blake. This was the system. This was the silence everyone agreed to so they could keep their jobs, their reputations, their fragile footholds in an industry that chews people up and spits them out with fake smiles and NDAs. And I was now a part of it, whether I liked it or not. I remember one night in particular. It was freezing on set, even though it was July. We were shooting a scene in a fake motel room, and I was on standby just outside the door. Headset on, clipboard in hand. Blake came out between takes, his brow furrowed, annoyed. "Harper, come here," he said. I followed, like I always did. He led me behind the set walls, out of sight, and then he turned, stood too close, and said, "You're tense lately. That's not good for the crew. They need you upbeat." His hand slid along my arm, and I flinched. "Don't be like that," he said. "You know this is how the game works." I stared at the floor, praying someone would walk by, praying for a noise, a distraction, anything. But no one came. It was like the universe was complicit, like even the walls had agreed to stay quiet. He leaned in, his breath hot and disgusting, and whispered, "If you want to stay on the next project, I need to know I can count on your loyalty." That word loyalty made my stomach twist, like I was some kind of pet, some trained dog expected to obey for scraps. He pulled back, smiled, and walked away like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just confirmed what I already knew. I was disposable. I wanted to quit so badly, to pack up my rental car and drive until the desert disappeared behind me. But then I checked my bank account and saw negative numbers, saw overdue rent, saw my mom's hospital email reminding me about her next checkup and the copay we still owed. So I stayed, because money has a way of making you quiet, of making you compliant, of making you complicit in your own destruction.
I started having nightmares, ones where I was screaming but no sound came out, or I was drowning on set while everyone filmed and clapped, calling it brilliant performance. I'd wake up soaked in sweat, heart racing, and still have to show up 2 hours later with coffee and clipboards and a fake smile. My body was shutting down. I caught colds that wouldn't go away, my hand shook all the time, and I'd sometimes forget where I was for entire minutes, spacing out when someone shouted orders at me. I couldn't focus, couldn't breathe properly, but Blake never noticed, or maybe he did and didn't care, because to him, I wasn't a person anymore, just another asset, a thing to manage. And the worst part is, I began to believe it too. There was a day when I found myself in the restroom, alone, staring at my reflection again, and I whispered, "Just get through this, Harper, just a few more weeks," like I was making a deal with myself, postponing the breakdown until it was safe to collapse. But nothing about this was safe. Not my mind, not my body, not my future. I knew that, but what else could I do? The next time Blake asked me to bring script notes to his trailer, I went, hands trembling. I told myself it was just paperwork. Maybe it would be different this time. But it wasn't. Of course, it wasn't. He locked the door behind me and leaned against it with that smug little grin. I asked where the revisions were, and he said he had something better to offer. "Let me help you, Harper. I could make your career." I said nothing, just stared at the script in my hands like it was a shield. He stepped forward, and I stepped back, but there was nowhere to go. The walls were too close, and so was he. His hand brushed my waist, and I froze, completely frozen, like my brain disconnected from my body, like I wasn't even inside it anymore. And that was the moment I realized I wasn't just surviving, I was vanishing, piece by piece, and no one even noticed.
I don't know how long I stood there after he left the trailer. Maybe 2 minutes, maybe 20. Time felt like it stopped existing for me. I just remember staring at the script in my hand, the words blurring together into nonsense. I couldn't read. I couldn't think. I couldn't even cry. I felt dirty. Not just physically, though that too. I could still feel the warmth of his palm on my skin like a stain. But deeper than that, like my soul had been dragged through filth. And the worst part was knowing I would go back to work in the morning and no one would say anything. No one would ask if I was okay. No one would stop him. Because they all saw it. They all knew. They just didn't care. Or maybe they did and were too scared to do anything, just like me. I remember walking to the bathroom in the crew lot and locking myself in the last stall. I sat on the toilet lid and tried to breathe, tried to remember who I was before all this started, before Blake, before Hollywood, before the bills and the empty fridge and the fake smiles. But nothing came to mind, just silence, like I had erased myself to fit into this machine, and the machine had eaten me whole. I skipped dinner that night, just drove back to the extended stay motel I was living in and curled up on the bed with all my clothes still on. I stared at the ceiling for hours, thinking about my mom, about how I used to sing her favorite songs to her when she was too tired from chemo to stand, how I promised her I'd make something of myself, that all the sacrifices would be worth it. And now here I was, lying in a stranger's bed in a city I didn't know, letting a man put his hands on me because I didn't have the money to walk away. What would she think if she saw me like this? What would she say? Probably nothing. She'd probably just hug me and cry, and I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let her see how far I'd fallen. So I kept going, kept showing up, kept doing my job like nothing was wrong, even though every day felt like swallowing glass. The worst thing is how quickly it became normal. The whispered threats, the lingering touches, the way he looked at me like I was already his property. It all started to feel routine. Like I was just going through the motions of someone else's life, like I wasn't really there at all. I laughed at jokes that made me want to scream. I nodded when people made comments about how lucky I was to work under a director like Blake. And all the while, I felt this cold, steady burn inside me, like something vital was dying and I was just watching it happen. There was one day, about 5 weeks into the shoot, when I saw a new girl on set, probably fresh out of film school, bright-eyed and naive, carrying a production binder way too big for her arms. She smiled at everyone, full of hope. And Blake noticed her too. I saw the way he looked at her, the same way he looked at me that first week, like he was already planning how he'd get her alone. And something inside me snapped. I couldn't let it happen again, not to someone else, not while I was still here. So I did something reckless. I wrote a letter. I didn't sign it. I didn't even use my own handwriting. Just typed it up on a crew laptop and printed it in the production trailer when no one was around. In it, I described everything,
what he'd done, how he'd cornered me, how he used his position to prey on young women who couldn't afford to say no. I didn't hold back, I didn't sugarcoat it. I just laid it all out and stuffed it in an envelope marked private, urgent, and slipped it under Diane's door before sunrise. Then I waited, heart pounding so hard I thought I'd collapse. I kept expecting someone to pull me aside, to question me, to fire me. But nothing happened. Not that day, not the next, not the one after that. Diane didn't even look at me differently. She just kept walking around with her headset and clipboard like always, barking at people to move faster like nothing had changed. And that's when I realized something even worse than being ignored. Maybe she already knew. Maybe everyone did, and they just didn't care. Or maybe she read it and threw it away. Or maybe she brought it to Blake, and now he was just waiting for the right moment to punish me for stepping out of line. I lived in fear for a full week, jumping at every noise, every footstep behind me, waiting for the hammer to fall. But it never did. Nothing changed. Nothing ever changed, except me. I started breaking down in little ways, forgetting call times, misplacing equipment, showing up late, small things that added up until Diane finally courted me and said, "Get your shit together, Harper, or I'll replace you with someone who can." And that's when I knew I was on my own, fully and completely alone. And if I wanted to survive this, I couldn't count on anyone else to save me. I had to figure out a way to protect myself, even if it meant playing along until I could escape for good. So I made a plan. Not a good one, not a strong one, but a plan nonetheless. I would finish the shoot, collect my final paycheck, and then I would disappear. Change my number, leave the city, maybe even change careers. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted out. I wanted air. I wanted space. I wanted my life back, or at least what was left of it.
The final stretch of filming was a blur of exhaustion, fake smiles, and quiet dread. Every morning, I'd wake up and stare at the ceiling, counting backward from 10, forcing myself to get out of bed, brush my teeth, show up on time, pretend to be okay. I was living in survival mode, completely numb but always alert. Like my brain was constantly scanning for danger, for the sound of Blake's voice, for the sudden tap on the shoulder that meant he needed me. I avoided him as much as I could, taking the long way around set, pretending to be on calls, volunteering for location pickups just to get away. But no matter how careful I was, he always found me. He never yelled, never threatened. That wasn't his style. He'd just appear, smiling like nothing had ever happened, like we shared some inside joke. And each time it chipped away at my sanity. He was so calm, so confident, like he knew I would never fight back. And honestly, I didn't know if I had the strength left to prove him wrong. One afternoon, I was organizing wardrobe notes in the back lot when he came up behind me, close enough for his breath to hit the back of my neck. I froze, instinctively holding my clipboard tighter. He leaned in and said, "You've been distant lately, Harper. I hope we're still on the same page." I turned slowly, keeping my expression neutral, and nodded, because what else could I do? Say no and lose everything? Or say yes and keep drowning? Either way, I was trapped. He looked pleased, like my silence was a victory, and walked away without another word. I stood there for a full minute after he left, gripping the edge of a wardrobe rack until my knuckles went white. I wanted to scream, to break something, to run. But instead, I took a deep breath, wiped the sweat from my face, and went back to work. That night, I got a call from my mom. I hadn't answered in weeks, and hearing her voice almost broke me. She sounded tired, but cheerful, like always. She told me she was proud of me, asked how filming was going, said she couldn't wait to see my name in the credits. I lied, said everything was going great, that I was learning so much, that the director was brilliant. She laughed and said, "See, I told you it would all be worth it." And I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. After the call, I sat on the floor of the motel bathroom and cried into a towel so the neighbors wouldn't hear. I hated myself for lying to her, but I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't let her worry. She had enough on her plate. I just had to make it a little longer, a few more days. Then I'd be free. But I underestimated him. Blake must have sensed I was pulling away because in that final week, he escalated. He started cornering me more often, touching me more casually, talking about my potential in front of others, planting seeds, trying to make it look consensual, like I was one of those girls who used her body to climb the ladder. It was a tactic, a trap. One night he called a private rap meeting with just me and him, said it was to go over scheduling for reshoots. I knew what it was. I knew it was bait. But if I refused, he'd punish me. If I went,
I'd have to face him alone. I considered quitting right then, walking off set and never coming back. But the paycheck hadn't hit yet, and I needed that money. So I went. I told myself I'd keep it professional, that I'd be cold, distant, untouchable. But when I walked into the trailer, he locked the door again. Same as always. He offered me wine. I declined. He laughed and poured himself a glass. "You're tense," he said. "You need to relax." I stood by the door, arms crossed, trying to stay calm. He walked toward me slowly, sipping his drink. "Do you know how many girls would kill for your position? You're lucky, Harper. I see something in you." I stared at him, trying to stay strong, but my body was already shaking. My hands sweating, my throat dry. He stepped closer, set his glass down, reached out to touch me, and that's when something snapped in me. I slapped his hand away, hard, harder than I intended. The sound of skin hitting skin echoed in the tiny trailer, and for the first time, his expression changed. He looked stunned. Not angry, just surprised. Like he couldn't believe I'd actually defied him. I used that second of silence to grab the script binder from the table and bolt for the door, unlocked it, ran outside, didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was in my car, hands trembling on the steering wheel. I locked the doors, turned the engine, and drove. I don't remember where I went, just that I couldn't be near him. I parked in some random grocery lot and sat there for an hour trying to catch my breath. That night, I didn't go back to the motel. I checked into a cheap roadside inn with the emergency credit card I'd sworn never to use. I turned off my phone, closed the curtains, and curled up under a scratchy blanket, heart pounding. I didn't sleep, just stared into the dark and waited for morning. I knew there would be consequences, but I didn't care anymore. I was done being quiet, done being used, even if it meant losing everything. At least I'd still have myself. I showed up on set the next morning fully expecting to be fired. I wore my plainest clothes, tied my hair back, no makeup, no effort, just a walking shell waiting for the axe to fall. And yet nothing happened. No one said anything, no angry messages, no glares, not even from Blake. He barely looked at me, like I didn't exist, which honestly scared me more than if he'd exploded. It meant he was planning something, calculating, waiting. I knew how men like him operated. Silence was never peace, it was preparation. I kept my head down, did my job, avoided eye contact, but inside I was unraveling. Every second felt like standing on a wire over a pit. I couldn't tell if I'd won or if I was being lured into a trap. The set felt different too, tense, colder. Maybe it was just me, or maybe people sensed something had shifted but didn't want to know what. On lunch break, I walked to the parking lot just to get away from everyone. I sat on the curb next to the generator trailer and tried to breathe. That's when Jenna, the makeup girl, walked over and sat beside me without a word. For a while, we didn't speak, just stared at the gravel. Finally, she said, "He did it to me too." My heart stopped. I looked at her, but she didn't look back. She just kept talking, softly, like she was saying it more to herself than to me. 3 years ago, my first job, I was too scared to quit, thought it was normal. I didn't say anything, just nodded slowly, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel completely alone. She reached into her pocket and handed me a folded piece of paper. I opened it. It was a business card for a nonprofit legal advocacy group based in Santa Fe. She said they had a lawyer who dealt with this kind of thing, someone who knew how to handle it without making a scene. I took the card, thanked her, and tucked it into my wallet without really thinking. I didn't know if I'd call, didn't know if I had the courage, but just having it felt like a lifeline. The next day, Blake avoided me again, but I noticed him spending more time with the new girl. Her name was Elise, and she reminded me of myself from 6 months ago. Eager, bright, trusting. I watched her laugh at his jokes, smile when he complimented her dress, and I felt sick because I knew what was coming, and I knew how fast that light could be extinguished. That night, I sat in my car and stared at the card Jenna gave me. I read it over and over, memorizing the number, imagining what would happen if I called. I imagined courtrooms, headlines, backlash. Imagined being called a liar, a slut, someone looking for attention. But then I imagined Elise in that trailer, and I couldn't shake it. I picked up my phone, dialed the number with shaking hands, and when someone answered, I almost hung up, but I didn't. I told them everything. Not my name, not yet. Just the story, just the facts. The woman on the line had a calm voice, no judgment, just quiet understanding. She said I wasn't alone, that this kind of abuse was systemic, and that there were options. She said if I wanted to pursue action, they could connect me with a legal advisor who'd keep it confidential. She also said, and I'll never forget this, even if you choose not to do anything right now, it still matters that you spoke. I ended the call in tears, but for once they weren't just tears of fear or shame. There was something else too, something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. I started documenting everything after that. Every text, every comment, every time he touched my arm or brushed past me on purpose. I kept a journal, took photos, screen-capped messages. I became my own investigator, and the more I recorded, the stronger I felt, like I was reclaiming some part of myself he thought he had broken. The final day of filming came faster than I expected. People were celebrating, hugging, taking selfies. Blake gave a little speech about how proud he was of the team, how this project had been a labor of love. I stood in the back, arms crossed, heart pounding. When he mentioned my name and called me a rising star in production, I nearly vomited. After the speech, he approached me one last time, handed me a wrapped gift, some cheap leather planner with my initials on it, and said, "Let's stay in touch." I smiled, said, "Of course," and walked away with the planner clutched like a loaded weapon. Later, I tossed it in the motel trash and didn't look back. That night my final payment hit my account. I checked out of the motel, packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases, and drove all night to a friend's house in Arizona. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving, didn't leave a note, didn't even update my socials. I just vanished. I slept for 3 straight days, only getting up to eat or shower. And when I finally woke up and looked in the mirror, I saw someone I barely recognized, but she looked alive, and that was a start.
The silence after everything ended was almost worse than the chaos. No more early call times, no more headset crackling in my ear, no more Blake, but the quiet was suffocating in its own way. Like I'd stepped out of a hurricane, only to realize I'd been walking through the eye of it. Every sound felt too loud, every moment alone too sharp. I spent hours just sitting in the guest room of my friend's house, staring at the ceiling, sometimes replaying everything in my head, sometimes going completely blank. I thought leaving the set would bring me peace, but instead it left space for the memories to rush in, unfiltered, unrelenting. I kept thinking about all the moments I hadn't spoken up, hadn't pushed harder, hadn't run. I hated how passive I'd been, how long I let it go on. I kept opening the folder where I stored the screenshots, the notes, the audio snippets I'd managed to capture when he thought no one was listening, and I'd just stare at them, like they belonged to someone else. Like maybe if I looked long enough, I could disconnect from the girl in those moments and pretend she wasn't me. I didn't know what to do next. I wasn't ready to go home, wasn't ready to tell my mom. I kept texting her generic updates, taking some time off, just catching up on rest, all good here. But the truth was, I was spiraling, eating 1 meal a day, if that, barely showering. I'd sleep 12 hours and still wake up exhausted. One night I heard a loud bang from outside, a garbage bin knocked over by wind, and I dropped to the floor instinctively, heart racing, breath shallow. It took me 20 minutes to calm down, and that's when I knew. This wasn't just sadness or stress. This was trauma, real, physical, embedded in my nervous system. I needed help, not just legal, but psychological. I remembered the woman from the hotline saying they had therapists too, so I called again. This time I gave my name. I told them everything, not just what happened, but how it was still happening inside me. How I couldn't sleep, couldn't think, how I kept feeling like he was still around every corner, even though I was hundreds of miles away. They connected me with a trauma counselor named Ellen, who didn't pressure me, didn't tell me to be strong, just listened. And for the first time, I heard someone say, "It's not your fault." And I broke. I cried harder than I ever had, not because I was sad, but because some part of me finally started to believe her. Ellen encouraged me to take small steps, simple routines, wake up, shower, eat, move, not to be productive, just to prove to myself that I still had control over my own body. I started journaling again, not just about Blake, but about everything. My childhood, my mom, my dreams, the version of myself I thought I'd lost. I began to feel like maybe I wasn't broken forever. Maybe I was just healing, slowly, painfully, but healing. After a few weeks, I called the legal advisor Jenna had told me about. Her name was Marcy, and she didn't sound like a lawyer. She sounded like a sister, someone who understood the language of damage. She walked me through my options. I could go public, file a formal complaint, even press charges, but there would be consequences. My name might go viral, trolls, backlash, my career could stall. I might never work in that town again. Or I could choose to pursue it quietly, submit my evidence to a private investigation group that worked with studios to hold predators accountable without media exposure. I asked her what she would do, and she said, "Whatever gives you peace, Harper." And that stuck with me, because peace was the one thing I didn't have. I didn't decide right away. I needed time. I needed to feel like a person again first. I started going outside more, reading, walking. I even volunteered at a local community theater, helping teenagers build sets and organize costumes. And for the first time in forever, I laughed, genuinely laughed. One of the girls reminded me of myself before all this, bright-eyed, hopeful, and I realized I didn't want her to ever feel what I had felt. That thought haunted me, and it's what finally pushed me to act, not for revenge, not even for justice, but for prevention, for every girl after me. I called Marcy back and said yes, I wanted to move forward. I wanted to submit my evidence. I wanted Blake Kessler held accountable, even if my name never made the news. Even if he never spent a day in jail, I wanted the truth somewhere on record. Because if I didn't,
I'd be carrying his secrets forever, and I was done carrying them. The next week was a whirlwind of paperwork, statements, digital transfers of files, meetings over Zoom with lawyers and advocates, and the entire time I felt this strange mix of fear and empowerment, like I was building a bridge back to myself one page at a time. They told me not to expect immediate results, that these things took time, that powerful men didn't fall easily, but they also said I wasn't the only one, and when I heard that, when I learned that there were others, I finally felt it. Not peace, not yet, but hope. Real, tangible hope. And it was the most beautiful, terrifying feeling I had in years.
The email came on a quiet Tuesday morning. I was sipping cold coffee, rereading an old journal entry about the first time he touched me, when the notification pinged. I opened it without thinking, expecting another form or update from the advocacy group, but instead I saw the words, "Formal investigation launched," followed by a date and a signature from a studio compliance officer. It felt surreal, like something I'd imagined in one of my late-night fantasies where Blake actually faced consequences. I read the email 3 times before I let myself believe it. They were looking into him, officially, and not just because of me. Apparently, another woman had come forward, a former assistant from a production he did back in 2021, and that was enough to push it past the point of no return. I should have felt victorious, but what I felt instead was panic, like my body had grown used to silence, and now the noise of justice was too loud, too sharp. I paced the kitchen floor, heart pounding, wondering what he would do when he found out. Would he come after me? Would he smear me? Would he find some way to twist everything and make me the villain? Ellen told me this reaction was normal, that abusers train their victims to fear exposure more than they fear the abuse itself, but still, I was terrified. I didn't sleep that night, kept checking my email and social media, half expecting Blake to post something cryptic, some veiled threat. But there was nothing, just silence. The next morning, Marcy called to check in. She said Blake had been notified of the investigation, that he'd hired a very expensive legal team and issued a brief denial through his agent. He's playing it cool, she said, but he's worried. I didn't know whether to be happy or horrified. All I knew was that the walls around him were starting to shake. Over the next few weeks, I spoke to more people, other women, crew members, even one former actor who said Blake had a long pattern of using power to manipulate people, especially young women who didn't have agents or representation. It wasn't just me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I was part of a pattern, and that realization did something to me. It made me braver. I agreed to submit a full written statement with my name on it. I stopped hiding behind initials and file numbers. I said who I was, what he did, and why it mattered. Part of me still feared what might come next. The industry wasn't kind to whistleblowers, especially women who spoke out about men with awards and connections. But another part of me, the stronger part, knew that silence was no longer an option. Meanwhile, Blake stayed quiet in the press, but I could feel the tension building. Friends from set texted me cryptic messages like, "Shit's going down," and "Did you hear about the meeting?" One even told me Blake was removed from a new project he'd just signed onto. Creative differences, they called it, but everyone knew. The whispers had started, and they were growing louder. One day, I got a DM from Elise, the new girl on set, the one I'd worried about. She said, "I think I owe you my safety." And I burst into tears reading it. She didn't say more. She didn't have to. I understood. And for the first time since this began, I felt like maybe, just maybe, something good was coming from all this pain. I started sleeping better, eating again, going outside without fear. I still had nightmares, still flinched at sudden noises, but the weight was lighter. Not gone, but manageable. Like I was finally learning how to carry it without letting it crush me. Ellen said I was making progress. Real progress. She said recovery wasn't a straight line, that some days I'd fall back, but the important thing was that I kept moving, and I was. Slowly, steadily. I started looking at job listings again. Not in film, not yet, but in nonprofit work, advocacy, maybe even writing. I had a voice now, and I didn't want to waste it. There was one night I opened a blank document and just started typing. Not a journal entry, but a letter to the version of me who walked into Blake's trailer that first time. I told her I was sorry, that none of it was her fault, that she did what she had to do to survive, and that I was proud of her for making it through. I cried while writing it, not out of sadness, but gratitude, because I realized something I never thought I would. I hadn't just survived Blake. I had survived the shame, the silence, the system that allowed him to exist. And now I was becoming someone new, someone stronger, and I wasn't going back.
The report was published 6 weeks later, not in a headline, not on the front page of Variety or Deadline, but quietly,
In an internal studio bulletin that circulated among executives and department heads, a summarized finding of inappropriate conduct, misuse of authority, and breach of professional ethics. Blake Kessler had been officially blacklisted from working with 3 major studios pending further investigation. He wasn't arrested, he wasn't publicly humiliated, but his phone stopped ringing. His projects were shelved, meetings canceled, agents distancing themselves quietly but decisively. I got an email from Marcy with a copy of the decision, attached with a note that simply said, "This is a start." And she was right. It wasn't everything, but it was something. I stared at that document for a long time, rereading the words that confirmed what I had lived through, what I had almost convinced myself didn't matter, didn't count, wasn't real. And now here it was, validated, named, recognized. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, like the waters inside me had finally stopped churning. I went for a walk that evening, through a nearby park. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the grass. Kids were playing. Someone was playing guitar near the fountain. Life was happening, real life, and I was finally rejoining it. Slowly. I had applied for a part-time job at a local nonprofit that helped young women navigate careers in media. Not big, flashy work, not Hollywood, but honest, grounded, meaningful. They offered me the position and I accepted, not because it was a perfect fit, but because it felt like a beginning. On my first day, I sat in a small office with a used desk and a bulletin board full of sticky notes, and I smiled. Genuinely, not the forced, scripted smile I used on set, but a quiet, full one that reached all the way to my chest. Later that week, Jenna and I met for lunch at a cafe near the Advocacy Center. She looked good, stronger than I remembered. We didn't talk about Blake. We didn't need to. Instead, we talked about books, music, bad Tinder dates, and new beginnings. At the end, she hugged me tight and said, "You made space for all of us." I didn't know how to respond, so I just hugged her back and whispered, "Thank you for handing me that card, because without her, I might have stayed silent forever." I never saw Blake again, never heard from him. He faded the way cowards often do, hiding behind silence, but I did hear from someone else. A producer I'd worked under years ago on a student set. He'd read my name in the investigation notes and sent a message. "I remember you," he wrote. "You were brave, even then." He said they were starting a new independent project, all-female crew, safe space, accountability-first production, and if I ever wanted to step back in, I'd be welcome. I didn't say yes, not yet, but I didn't delete the message either. I let it sit there, a possibility, a reminder that maybe one day I'd return, not because I had to prove anything, but because I deserved to walk those sets without fear. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but someday. And until then, I'd keep living, healing, helping, writing. I started writing articles under a pen name, essays about power, silence, survival. Not confessions, not sob stories, but truths, ugly and beautiful, complicated and real. And they started to reach people. Strangers emailed me, thanked me, told me I'd put words to something they'd never been able to name. And each message was a stitch in the fabric I was weaving around myself, a new identity that wasn't built on pain, but on recovery and love and the relentless desire to rise. I still had scars. I still had days where I froze at a sound or doubted my worth or wondered what might have happened if I'd said something sooner. But I didn't hate myself anymore. I didn't carry his shame in my bones. I had returned it to him. All of it. And in its place, I built something mine. This story doesn't end with revenge or justice served on a silver platter. It ends with a quiet woman sitting at a borrowed desk, typing out the truth so someone else out there might find it, might see themselves in it and know they're not alone. It ends with me choosing every single day to exist loudly, to reclaim space, to survive with intention, and most importantly, to never let silence win again.